it's an absolute pleasure that we were able to have Bill Campbell come back. He's former dean of the School of Pharmacy, and the Campbell Mentoring Program is named after he and his wife, Bill and Karen Campbell. Bill and Karen Campbell, and a lot of us benefit from that wonderful program, both as mentors and mentees. And it's just an absolute, I would have to say that he is the perfect example of a wonderful mentor, and he definitely has mentored me as well as many other people in this school. So thank you for taking, and I'm going to cry. No, thank you for taking the time to come back.
Thank you, Betsy. But I'm not responsible for Betsy. Okay. Okay, I don't need that. Thank you. Well, it's always wonderful to be back home and see old friends' faces, and I appreciate the many kindnesses of all of you. Thanks, Delisha. Betsy's assigned me this topic, and so I will move along here. And I've chosen to, she asked me to talk about mentoring, so I thought, well, who is the cultural repository of all wisdom, and that's in an organization, and of course that's Dilbert. So I chose to call this the Dilbert's Guide to Mentoring. Let's see, and so I will move forward. Oh, come on. No, how did I? That wasn't, okay. Forward, oh, on the screen? Okay. Left click. Okay, so any discussion about mentoring has to have the obligatory first slide of how did it all start? And mentoring started, as you all remember from your undergraduate requirement in literature to read the classics, from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And the characters in the Iliad and Odyssey were, first of all, Odysseus, who was going to go off around the world and have all these adventures of the twin sirens and the Cyclops and all the rest of that. But in so doing, he was going to leave the beautiful Penelope, his wife, and his son Telemachus. But he was going to leave them in the care of his friend, Mentor. And so Mentor was the person who raised Odysseus' son, who brought him to manhood, who was the person available at all times, who watched Penelope to make sure she didn't stray, and was going to report back when Odysseus came back about what happened and so forth, and take responsibility for this. So the themes of a mentor are captured in all of that epic poem. A selfless person, a trusted, totally trusted individual, senior, older person, an authority figure, wise beyond words, experienced, an observer who will also be a reporter, and a person of unquestioned and incredible integrity. So all of that is somehow captured in popular literature, and obviously, if we have all of that in place, who wouldn't want to have a mentor, to have all of that to help you, guide you through life? And yet, somehow, there are people who are reluctant to be a mentor. As Dilbert describes, would you be my mentor? It's better for me if none of my underlings are qualified to take my job. I think you just taught me something. Oh, I hate it when I do that. Obviously, a person who probably shouldn't be a mentor. And so I see mentors. I see the need. It won't work if we don't have mentors, and yet I do see a lot of reluctant mentors in the world. So I have to convince you, first of all, why all of you, I see mentors in this room, and why all of you should be, at some point in your careers, mentors. not the CEO of Dilbert. So okay, now back to, okay, don't click on, okay. So why should you all be mentors? And I'm going to convince you of why you should. You may have been following the very interesting literature about human species is unique in one particular way, in that we alone in the mammalian world have what is called an altruism gene. And that is polymorphism, COMT. And if you follow this fascinating literature, we alone have that gene, and some of us, some people in the population with this gene more pronounced than others, can be tested in behavioral research ways to demonstrate a form of altruism, giving to others without any receipt of benefit. And there are all kinds of studies that have been allegedly showing this. But, for example, leaving money or change to people who will benefit it and the person will never know. My argument to you then is that the altruism gene is unique to the human species, and therefore altruism is what makes us uniquely human. And there is no greater demonstration of altruism than mentoring, helping the next generation. Therefore, to be truly and uniquely human, the highest expression of humanity is to be a mentor. Did I convince you? Okay. If not, let me then take the words of what might be one of the finest mentors any of us will ever know, which is Professor Cohn. And in a manuscript he has prepared and submitted and will shortly be published, he makes the case that mentoring is not something that can be compared to a catalyst. It's incorrectly compared to a catalyst. Catalyst is something that's added to an ingredient, added to a reaction, either accelerates or impedes or changes the reaction, but the catalyst remains unchanged. His point, which is exactly the point, is the mentor is changed also. It's not a zero sum. You change, the person receives the mentoring, but you are in the process changed and benefited as well. So mentoring is a two-way interaction where you benefit enormously. And I believe anyone who has ever mentored believes that and understands it. And secondly, if that won't convince you, perhaps I could convince you that mentoring is often valued highly by an organization such as this. And so it's an organization culture and value. It's sometimes rewarded in other ways. But in any case, I hope I can convince you, or have convinced you, that being a mentor is one of the highest values of humanity. And yet, not everyone wants to be mentored, as Dilbert convinces us. The pointy-haired boss offering to be a mentor, and ESOP saying, "I wish I were dead rather than you being my mentor." So why, if there is a reluctance on anyone's part to be mentored, perhaps I can convince you from the same perspective of beginning with genetics. It was Darwin who said, successful adaptation of any species or individuals is based upon learned behavior or adaptive behavior, where we change in order to be successful in our environment, sometimes hostile environment. I wouldn't say university is a hostile environment, but we do need to adapt and change in our environment in order to be successful. It's simply survival of the fittest in the university should lead us to want to be mentored. Now, there happens to be also a great deal of current interest in mentoring, and I just did a Google search today and had something short of 17 million hits on entering mentoring. So it's a topic of enormous interest and discussion within any organization. Interesting, there's also a renter-mentor program that New York Times just reported, and there are a couple of websites, Mentor Mob, Pivot Planet, Skillshare, and so forth, which I leave to you to pick up. And there is even an app on mentoring. So if you want to be mentored, there are many opportunities, and I would question whether some of those are truly mentoring, but there's enough interest in the topic, I think, to argue that mentoring should be accepted when offered in most cases. Despite that, I see a big difference between mentoring and a mentoring program. There are many successful mentors, and there are many successful mentees, but I see very, very few mentoring programs. And that's really where I want to spend most of the time today. What I see are mentors, what I see are mentees. What I don't see, except at University of North Carolina, Eshelman School of Pharmacy, is successful, quality mentoring programs. So why is that? Again, I turn to Dilbert. Someday you'll be just like me, he says to ESOP. Please drive a stake through my heart. And the answer of why there are so few mentoring programs, I think, is captured here, because we really don't agree on what mentoring is. There's a great deal of discussion, differentiation, and argument about what indeed is mentoring. And if Dilbert doesn't convince you that there's confusion about mentoring, I turn to a next icon culturally. Miley Cyrus was recently interviewed and identified that she has taken on the responsibility for mentoring Justin Bieber because people just don't take him seriously. Who better than Miley to help someone be taken seriously? And Miley goes on in the text, which I'll read. Miley says, "Because I'm older than he is, I can help him." And she's technically right. She's 20 and he's 19, so she is older than him. So if I could have not yet convinced you that there's confusion about what is mentoring, perhaps I can at least use this as an example of a sign of the approaching apocalypse, if Miley Cyrus is indeed the model of a mentor. So let me talk about mentoring. And I begin with what I'm afraid I constantly harangue Hal and others when I'm ever asked to speak about this mentoring. I start with Campbell's rule number 1 of mentoring, and it's that mentoring is a contact sport. And what I mean by that is, from my very first experience as an assistant professor, when I volunteered to be a part of a mentoring program for minority students at an unnamed university, we met at the first of the year with our mentees, and without any direction, guidance of any kind, to get together, talk, and we'll get together again at the end of the year. At the end of the year, we got together for another luncheon. Someone asked us to raise our hands. How many of us had actually met? Very few people had even met. To have a mentoring program without some structure and substance and guidance to it is kind of like Dean Smith throwing a basketball out on the court and saying, okay, learn to play basketball. It just doesn't work that way. You have to have constant, substantive contact. And you can't have constant, substantive contact unless you have an agenda and an understanding of the information that needs to be exchanged. So it starts, first of all, with a commitment to continuous substantive contact. And if I leave nothing else with you today, I want to leave that much. Where I would go from that is then to, I suppose, very egotistically say, what I want to present to you and leave you today with is a general theory of mentoring. Now, I borrowed this from Albert Einstein, who got the Nobel Award for a general theory of relativity. Is that reaching too high? Okay. So I want to say to you that as I look at mentoring, and this is a general model in any setting, in any situation, I see it three areas of mentoring, three areas that have to be covered, three areas where the contact sport has to be continuous and substantive in order to be achieved. The first is what I call structure, helping the mentee understand who does what in your environment. Who does what in your environment? The second are what I call norms. What are the right things to do in your environment, or doing the right thing? And the third are outcomes. What's success? If we know who does what, if we know what the right thing to do is, how do we know we've reached success in that whole gamish? So there's three areas of information. And then I see two perspectives to look at all of those areas. The first perspective is, of course, the individual, the mentee, the recipient, the beneficiary, primary beneficiary. And the second is the institution, the organization, the perspective of the large organization, which is the mentor's responsibility to understand and transmit. So it's, if you will, for the DPOP outcomes group, graduate students and faculty, it's a 3x2 matrix. Structure, norms, and outcomes, the content, individual and institution perspective. So it looks something like that. We figure out the individual, we look at it from the individual's perspective, we look at it from the institution's perspective, and then we try to figure out who does what, what's the right thing to do, and how do we measure success. And I must acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from one particular form of mentoring, which is academic mentoring. It's the same thing if you're mentoring in a private industry. It's the same thing generally if you're in government, in private organization, nonprofit, whatever. But the content, the information will be different, as I'll try to convince you and show you later. So I sat down one day and said, if I were going to be, after a 30-plus year career in the university, in the academy, what do I think would have to be covered in terms of who does what helping young people understand the who does what part of a university. And I just sat down and started writing the various things that would have to be covered that a new person would not understand, but a mentor would understand, and how that contact sport would occur with continuous and substantive contact. So I just started writing these things, and here are the kind of structures, and I will go through. For example, small grants. Every mentee, every young faculty must understand, and there must be a discussion about small grants in the role of mentoring and moving a person toward a successful academic career. And small grants, the opportunity restricted typically to young investigators, the shorter turnaround time, the advantage of the reviews that takes place, the building block it provides to a subsequent larger grant, and the experience of just being part of that process. In my view, that's an important discussion that should always take place with a strong encouragement to help the person move forward with a small grant application at the first opportunity it occurs. Now, that's my particular view, but I think that's the kind of discussion that has to happen. And we can keep moving down that road. What are the administrative roles in an organization? What do these strange people called deans do? Assistant deans, associate deans, divisions head, vice chairs, so on and so forth. It's not obvious to a newcomer coming into an organization like a university what these people do, and yet they are the people who determine their success. What is the research expertise that exists in the people within this organization in which you reside? And how do I know them, and how do I find them? The mentor is the person who is the first person to open those doorways. Where does TA and RA support come from? And if I need more or less, how do I navigate that change? That's a discussion. How do I get laboratory space? Where does IT support begin, end, and what's reasonable to ask for, and what can I get? Instrumentation, grant and contract administration, on and on and on. And I just list these as all the kinds of who does what in an organization. And so when I would look back and say after a year and people haven't met and they say, we didn't know what to talk about, I would say, have you covered each one of these in sufficient depth so that the young person in your organization understands the role of these persons and structures in their lives? Well, you can't do that in 1 meeting, 2 meetings, 3 meetings, 10 meetings. Obviously, it takes an enormous amount of time. So I think one of the first things to do is identify the curriculum for a mentoring program. And this is my approach and how I would suggest that needs to be done. Now, I also want to say that this occurs in an environment that is sometimes, that varies enormously by the availability of resources. So a mentoring program in this university is very different from a mentoring program in another university, even if the subjects are the same. Because TA and RA support here is a whole lot different than TA and RA support at another university, and the administrative roles are different. So it needs to be contextualized with the environment in which you exist, with specific reference to the resources. And I guess I also need to point out this last one, who does what. One of the things you have to understand is tolerating when to appear and when not to appear at seminars from over-the-hill emeritus deans and faculty members. Now, the next step I would do in this is to divide these into the perspectives. And what I've done here is taken from that whole list of who does what coming from the institution and who does what coming from the individual. The individual brings to the table new time, new talent, sometimes transferring projects, new collaborations, new research methods, new collegiality, and sometimes a new understanding of collegiality, energy, teaching innovations, teaching approaches, complementarity with your existing programs, changes in the culture that I bring because I came from another institution, new science, sometimes new students, sometimes research staff. These are all the things new faculty, mentees bring into an organization. And these are all the things that existing mentors in an organization bring to the table from this institution. Pairing these things together, having the discussion of how this transfer project fits within collaborators randomly chose in this organization is not a simple or short discussion. And all of these together is not a short or simple discussion. It is a lengthy, detailed, and substantive discussion. So that's the final piece in terms of 1/3 of the agenda of a mentoring program, putting this all together. Now, that's just my view. That's me sitting down, figuring out what I think are the critical areas, and you would do it a different way. And I would also say and acknowledge, again, that I'm talking about academic mentoring. The topics would be different in industry. Instead of small grants, it would be project reports or project applications. In terms of collegiality, it might be product development teams and quarterly reports. They're different in the different organizations, but they are also the who does what in any organization. And if I would sit down for an industry mentoring program, I would have the same sort of 3x2 matrix, but the content areas would be different. Now, the second third is what I call norms, the doing the right thing in an organization topic of discussion. And I'll just start with one that I talk about all the time, the first do no harm. James Coleman, who's a great sociologist at University of Chicago and used Rogers' diffusion and adoption of innovation model to become essentially the guru of pharmaceutical industry marketing and media, and every new product and old product and marketing message today in industry comes from Coleman's work. Coleman did a lot of very interesting things in his life. That one that people hasn't really received a lot of acknowledgement, but Coleman went back and looked at promotion failures in universities. And somehow in a different era, he was able to collect information. And he was asking, what is the fatal flaw most commonly in a university that prevents a young faculty member from being advanced into the associate tenured rank? And he had collected enormous data and surveyed and so on and so forth. And this is aged, but what he found was really surprising. And there are many different reasons, of course, but he said the one most common explanation of why faculty were prevented from advancing was in some place along the way they had embarrassed the senior faculty in terms of their science, in terms of public presentations, in terms of meeting within the faculty, in terms of curriculum committee, whatever. And I don't want to present that as gospel, but I think much of what we as mentors need to do is make sure the young faculty does no harm. First, do no harm with all of your energy and activity and things you're trying to do. And I think that's just a matter of wisdom and understanding organization and trusted mentor to Telemachus. Now, there are also grant preparation, and at what point is it that you need to be sure that there is grant preparation and submission activity occurring? What are the publication norms in your particular unit? I particularly have a very strong feeling about the thesis and postdoc work being extended into publication in the first year at least of a new faculty position, and that should be a very strong emphasis of a new faculty position. What is academic citizenship? How do you recruit a collaborator across the street? How do we communicate within this particular organization? Draft review of documents, submissions of manuscripts, as well as proposals. How does that do? Just help me understand how I can get that review from my colleagues in this room. And I would go on, and I have a whole list of things like this, and we don't have the time for me to go at length, and I would talk about each one of those. But that seems to me another third of the agenda for this conversation that must take place between mentors and mentees, and I also argue it takes place in a resource-rich environment, and these things can be then divided into a perspective of what does the mentee bring to the table, what does the mentor bring to the table, and each of those can be mixed and matched in a topic of rich discussion to help advance the career of the young person. Now, the third and last part of that content area for a mentoring program is what I'd call what's success, identifying success. What are the outcomes? And again, this first one is a bit of a rant on my part, but I use it frequently. And I got this from reading actually in mentoring in the industry. A particular pharmaceutical firm had a mentoring program that I was very interested in, and they made a very interesting point, I thought, of every person deserves a good first day. Every person deserves a good first day in your organization. We spend an enormous amount of time recruiting, search committees, placement of position announcements, bringing people in for visits, travel, a round of interviews, putting together recruitment packages, bringing them back, sometimes a spousal second position. Literally millions of dollars spent in investing in a person coming into an organization. And I said, typically in the university then, what happens on the first day the person shows up? It's something like this. Oh, is it today that you were coming? Wait a minute, your office, we don't have your office ready yet. But I'll show you where it is. It's down, oh gosh, we didn't get the desk here, did we? Okay. That's a typical first day in the university. It was my first day in the university. And the other part of that is everyone remembers their first day in the organization. How simple is it to make sure everybody has a good first day? Nothing's easier than that. And the other point it makes is outcomes and measures of success don't start 3 years down the road. They start immediately, right now. So a good first day, you're here, we've been waiting for you, welcome, I'm your mentor, here's your office, here's your lab, we've got it set up, here's the administrative person who's going to help you, here's how you get, I want you to meet the IT people, here's your classroom, here's how it's, come on, that's about as easy as it gets. So, again, there's a whole agenda, I think, in terms of what's the content, but let's say for outcomes, it starts with a good first day. And then it goes to, there's an annual and merit review, I guarantee you, first year, but it doesn't occur 12 months down the road. It occurs 6 to 9 months where it starts. Okay? And then you have all these other things. You have an initial review and reappointment as an assistant professor. Who knows what that is when you start as an academic career? Nobody knows what that is, but it gets there before you are ready for it and before you even know it. And your guide, your telemachus guide, your mentor to that is the person who helps you be ready for it, not 2.5 years later, but be ready for it from the first year, understanding that it's down the road, and this is what it is. This is what it involves. Well, I don't want to go on with each one of these, but I hope you see that there is something like salary adjustment that sometimes occurs in a university. What do you need to do to be ready? Not when it happens, but before it happens. The whole issue of extramural support, the role of grants versus contracts in your particular organization. What's an investigator versus sponsored versus external sponsor support mean in your particular organization, peer review, and so on and so forth. But the other point I'm trying to make here is even though it starts at first day, and that's something that we really have to understand, it also doesn't end at promotion and tenure. That's one critical point. But in a great mentoring program, in a great university, success is beyond that. It's associate professor, it's endowed professor, it's distinguished professor, it's center and institute director, it's membership in an academy, it's fellowship in a distinguished discipline. It's on and on and on. It's true distinguished investigator faculty status. Notice I don't mention dean in any of these. So the outcomes are the third chapter, the third piece of the curriculum I see in successful mentoring and mentor programs. And again, it means different things in different organizations, with a large part of that percentage of variance explained due to the resources of the organization. And I can divide that, again, as I said, what the individual brings to what the institution brings. But the difference here between the other two sections is they're the same. The definitions of success are exactly the same from the institution's perspective as from the individual's perspective. At this point, they have aligned, and a good first day and is recognized by the mentor and the mentee, and is a shared responsibility. Annual and merit reviewed, shared responsibility. So in this case, they align together. It is essential that success be an agreed upon area of discussion. With that, if I have convinced you that there is a general theory of mentoring that is possible, and it can be achieved by covering these content areas in this way and measured in that way, then I'm going to close by saying I think we could actually phenotype mentoring programs, again, in the academy, but in any place, into these kind of structures, norms, outcomes. And so what I'd say is there's one cluster of mentoring or mentor programs that stem from mentees demanding, wanting, questioning. We have high resource contribution from the mentees saying we have all this to give, to be ready to put into action, but we don't know how to access all of these things, and we need mentors to help us get there. That's what I call the mentee-driven mentoring programs. They're the scarcest possible resource, and Dilbert's reluctant mentors have to be somehow identified and energized. But in my view, most mentoring programs today in academia are this type. They're mentee-driven with sometimes too reluctant mentors available to help drive the process. And they're not going to be successful, or they're going to be successful in the most limited way without marshaling all these things from the institutional perspective. The other and relatively fewer mentoring program, in my view, is what I call mentor-driven. That is, mentors, the institutional, saying, it's not working. We have all these people coming in, and it's just, they're not achieving, they're not getting to where they need to be. We need to do a better job of giving to them what the institution provides, helping them understand. And I think that's relatively rare because not any selfishness out of mentors or senior faculty. They're just very, very busy doing other kind of things, and it's one additional obligation. And I would say at this university, one of my great pleasures was when I spoke to the senior faculty, the professors, and said, here is an area developing a mentoring program where we can really, as senior faculty, as full professors, make a unique contribution. The faculty, the senior professors, leaped to the opportunity. And Darren Thacker and Hal and others, I won't embarrass beyond mentioning their names, said, yes, we're not being used sufficiently enough. We're not imparting all we have. And this is a great opportunity for us to do something more. And it was just a great pleasure to see the faculty of this school say, we want to step up to the plate here. That's pretty rare, I must say. And then the other cluster of mentoring programs are, I'd say, this lives in this sort of short area here where give a good start, but it dissipates pretty quickly. These aren't really mentoring programs in my view. I think they're just kind of buddy programs. I'm here, I'm available to help you if we want. Give me a call. You know, you're on, soon as we can cut you loose, I'm going to cut you loose. And I think that's better than nothing, but it's not really a great mentoring program. So that's kind of where I would phenotype mentoring programs in academic pharmacy today and in academia today, if they even exist. That's kind of the state of art of what I see as mentoring programs. And so I ask you the question, what is the ideal mentoring program in an academic unit? And I suppose it's a trick question because I view it as one that perfectly aligns the institutions and the individual's resources. And if it's to be a buddy program, that's okay. And if it's to be a mentor-driven program, that's okay. It's to be a mentee-driven program, that's okay. If that's what the institution wants, if that's the best alignment. But the real question, I think, is if this is kind of what it looks like in academia today, the real question is what's the ideal mentoring program for UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy? A lot more interesting to me, a lot more interesting to you. We can't save the world yet. We'll do that later when we get perfection here. And I think it is to take this current phenotyping of programs and move it as far out to the definition of ultimate success. Distinguished professor, member of scientific academy, institute center director, endowed professor, center direct, the very highest level of success in a university. And so we turn everything Carolina blue. And we move mentoring programs out of the buddy program, the mentee-driven, and we move out here, which is the highest possible level of success, of leadership, of distinction. And we do that, I think, in only one way. We do it by an emphasis on scholarship. It is only from beginning in day one, understanding that in an academic environment, through the advancement of knowledge and the recognition of our peers in science and research, that we are able to reach the highest levels of mentoring in an academic environment. So, that's my message. I'm so pleased that that is the approach of the mentoring program, the Campbell mentoring program here at Carolina. I think the emphasis on scholarship is what has made it distinctive. It's what makes it different. And I know because my name's attached to it, and I get called and have to speak to other organizations, because Hal's the director of the program. He gets called and makes presentations and gets set on panels and so forth. We're constantly asked sort of the same set of questions. How do you do it? The second is, this is what we're thinking about. How's that sound to you? And my immediate response tends to be, that ain't mentoring. that doesn't get you there. But that's not the right answer. The right answer is if it's okay for you, if it's right for your environment, that's right for you. But what's right for us, what's right for this place, is this striving towards scholarship in the mentoring program. And I'll stop with that to say that either I have convinced you that that's what mentoring is, that's how you get there, that's the content, it has to be a contact sport that's substantive and continuous. These are the areas that has to be covered. But if you don't agree with me, there are alternatives. I thank you and be happy to take any questions you might have. Mentoring is not cloning either. If you follow Wally and Dilbert, we don't need any more Wallies. Okay, that's it? Yes? Mm-hmm. Well, I think, one, it starts with it's a volunteer, isn't it? I mean, and that's a key part of this particular program. It's a volunteer choice. You don't have to. It's there available for you. And you're each invested in it equally at the beginning. I think that's really critical. You can't create mentoring programs that are obligatory, A. B is, in my experience, there are very, very few situations where it doesn't work. Okay, if both are equally committed to actually doing the work, the reason it typically doesn't work is one doesn't show up to work. So that's why I try to say not showing up for work is not an option, because you cannot say you covered all these things in 3 or 4 or 5 years even without constant substantive contact. So that's I think the biggest failure. The third I would say is dropping out and terminating a mentor-mentee relationship is not a failure. A flame out is a failure, but a dropout is not a failure. So if it doesn't work, it's amicable divorce, and you go on your way. That's not a failure. And the other thing is, of course, in a program like this, with Dr. Cohn's direction, the selection and pairing of mentors is a very important process. It's not a happenstance thing. It's a very careful pairing of people. And I'm not sure it's matchmaking at the website level, but it's is that. And well, I guess those would be my primary comments on it. Yes, Hal? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a tough and a very good question. Actually, one of the unique things here with this program, after thinking many years about mentoring, what I wanted to do was a mentoring team. First of all, that's very unique in mentoring. You don't see mentoring teams. You see one-to-one. Here it's a mentoring team. And I think that's really critical for all kinds of reasons. And the team is an inside person, an outside person, brings different perspectives in. It also, extends the institution out. It has all kinds of benefits to think of it in those terms. And as I think about mentoring at mid-career and career level, I think that team approach is where it needs to come more and more into. The team needs to be broadened. I mean, that's what happens in mid and advanced career. You don't have a one-to-one. You may have one, but you have a mentoring team that expands. And instead of 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, it's more like 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1. And so I guess philosophically, one of my answers to that would be we'd have to think about more and more the team and the structure of the team approach.